Hey everybody, welcome back to World History. Today we will be doing section 2 on World War II. This is also our last section of notes before spring break, so go ahead and get your notes out and let's get started. So to start things off, and we kind of started this last time, the Nazis are going to invade Poland, and they're going to utilize a concept known as the Blitzkrieg, or Lightning War. This is utilizing improved tanks and air power tech to strike really quickly, like lightning. They're also going to utilize the Luftwaffe, or Germans' Air Force. They're going to strike first. And at the same time, Stalin is going to invade from the east. Poland is pretty much gone at this point. Britain and France couldn't help due to their location. They're a little too far out of the way. So they're going to declare war. Now, within this, we have to talk about the demarcation line that essentially split what parts of Poland were given to Germany and what parts were given to the Soviet Union. This was established on September 28th of 1939, and it ran, for the most part, down the center of what was Poland. So, the miracle at Dunkirk. France and Great Britain are going to be behind this Maginot line, this red line. This defensive line that had been built in the 1930s to deter a future invasion by Germany and force them to move around said fortifications. Now, if you see from here, the line's a lot stronger in the south than it was in the north, along the Belgian border. So that's really where we're going to see things come into play. The Germans aren't going to try and go through down here. These are strong fortifications. There's no way through. They're going to try and push through the north. So, as a result, Germany's going to surprise France by attacking through the Ardennes forest, which was allegedly invasion-proof, and German troops are going to flood into France. And in May 1940, at the city of Dunkirk, a port in France in which 300,000 Allied troops were evacuated that were trapped between the Nazis and the English Channel. Actually, from this, we're going to see a massive rise in British morale because of the amount of civilian ships that got involved to help evacuate people. Anybody that was in sailing vessels, fishing boats, they heard the call for help, they showed up and started ferrying troops out there across the channel. Of course, there's also the popular movie. Now, eventually, France is going to fall. And they're going to sign the surrender documents in the same railroad car that Germany had signed the armistice. And as a result, everything in red is going to be directly occupied by the Germans. And while the purple is allegedly still a free zone from November 1942, the German government is going to set up a puppet state in southern France in the city of Vichy, right here, essentially just being like, well, technically you're still France, but you're ran by the German government. And as a result, Hitler actually celebrated by visiting Paris and visiting the Eiffel Tower and the other tourist destinations. So, Germany thought Great Britain would fold without France. And there was a lot of defiance at the hands of the new Prime Minister Winston Churchill, this gentleman right here. So, the Germans are going to launch Operation Sea Lion, an attempt to invade Britain. Uh-oh. Oh, goodness. Excuse me. Ugh, these allergies are kicking my butt. Where was I? Oh, yeah. Operation Sea Lion. Now, as a result of this, the Germans are going to attempt to utilize massive airstrikes against military targets than the cities. But they're also going to target some cities. They're going to utilize the Blitz, just like they had on Poland, on London. But Britain became more and more determined. And Hitler's actually going to fail to take Britain. And this was his only attempt to take Britain. He's not going to try again after this. So moving on to Africa, because we're fighting literally everywhere, we have to talk about General Erwin Rommel, codenamed Desert Fox, which is that cute little creature right there. But here's the real guy. Now, he was a brilliant Nazi commander, and he's going to push the British out of Libya into Egypt. At the same time, Italy's going to invade Greece, which Germany's going to reinforce. So now at this point, the Axis powers have taken control of Greece, Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, and Hungary, most of the Balkans region. By 1941, most the Axis powers or the Allies controlled most of Europe. Um, Here's another good image of Rommel. Basically, at this point, Europe was controlled by one of the two major powers. After a while, Germany's going to turn on the Soviet Union and invade them, which is great for the British and bad, very bad for Germany. In an operation known as Operation Barbarossa, the goals were to take the natural resources of Russia, the Soviet Union, that Germany needed so they could quote unquote swim in the plenty. Their other main goal was to crush communism and beat Stalin. While they had been allies, Germany saw communism as a threat and they wanted it gone. And they thought it was better that the Soviet Union be under a fascist dictator instead of a communist one. Now, Stalin was extremely unprepared. He lost 2.5 million soldiers pretty quickly. They're going to destroy factories, farm equipment, and burn crops as they retreat, utilizing a scorched earth policy. And very quickly, Germany's going to be in the positions to take the city of Moscow and Leningrad. But they're going to be stalled because, you guessed it, the Russian winter. The same thing that had stopped Napoleon over a century earlier is going to also stop the Germans. So the siege of Leningrad, this lasted for 2.5 years, and over 1 million lives are going to be lost. Within the city, your rations were you were given 2 pieces of bread a day. Stalin's going to reach out to Britain and be like, hey, I know we did this dumb thing, but could you help us, please? Now, it's important to remember Germany is going to be unsuccessful again in taking this, and by defeating Russia, they're not going to do it. So, life under Nazi and Japanese occupation. We'll talk about life under the Nazis first, and then we'll talk about the Japanese. Now, within this, Hitler's going to establish a new order based on his radical obsessions. He's going to establish puppet governments led by Aryans, or those that were light skinned, and establish territories that were an economic resource to be plundered and looted. And within this, if you resisted, you were met with being shot and or tortured. This is the hallmark of the 30s and the first part of the 40s. The Germans are also going to establish concentration camps, or detention centers for civilians considered enemies of the state. This is where they're going to start sending thousands of Jewish people across Europe. Now, the Nazis are going to then start to commit genocide against anybody that they considered to be racially inferior. This was people that were of Jewish descent, Slavic descent, Romas, the Gypsies, anybody that was a homosexual, disabled. The Jews are also going to be forced into ghettos or confined to sections of the city where disease and malnutrition are going to be common. And eventually, by 1942, at the Wannsee Conference, they'll make the decision on the final solution of the Jewish problem and begin to commit genocide, or the deliberate killing of a large number of people from a particular nation or ethnic group with the aim of destroying that nation or group. I will warn you, the next couple of pictures are kind of shocking, so brace yourselves. It was very customary. If you were in the camps, you were not fed. You were forced to work long hours in non-seasonally appropriate clothing, so a lot of times you died from exposure as well. Upon arrival, your personal belongings were taken away. At the end of the war, when the camps were liberated, Allied forces will just find rooms filled with stacks of shoes, glasses, luggage, any item of value that the Germans could have taken for themselves. You were lucky if you lasted. Upon arrival in the camps, you were typically separated by gender and then by age. Anybody under the age of 16 was immediately sent to the gas chambers. And if you were over the age of 60, you were also sent to the gas chamber. It is very common in most of these camps that children would be, like small children, like 4 and 5, be loaded in the back of a truck where the truck's exhaust has been routed into the main cabin, and then you're told you're going for a drive, and you suffocate on the carbon monoxide. Life in the camps was difficult. More often than not, you were struggling to find a simple day's worth of food. It was hard work, and usually you were lucky if you survived more than a year. This became known as the Holocaust, or a systematic genocide of about 6 million European Jews by the Nazis. This was based on religious and ethnic heritage, and within this racism and intolerance. It's important to note that Germany, while they established the concentration camps and these death camps, they didn't establish them in Germany. They established them in Poland. The main ones being Auschwitz-Birkenau, Belzec, Chełmno, Majdanek, Sobibor, and Treblinka. Typically in the camps, like I said, you were either gassed, you were worked to death, or you were subject to horrible medical experimentation at the hands of some of the worst doctors ever, including Joseph Mengele, who had an obsession with twins. He would cut out organs and transplant them to the other twin to see if they'd survive. Now, a lot of people started to resist. These are partisans. And immigration policies prevent refuge in a lot of countries. The United States closed our borders to Jewish people. We closed our borders. Let that sink in for a minute. We prevented people from escaping Europe and coming to the United States. Now, jumping over to the Pacific for a moment. Japan was working on an empire in Asia and the Pacific with their brutal conquests. Their mission was to help Asians escape Western colonial rule, in theory. In actuality, their empire was extremely brutal. At this point in 1942, everything in red was controlled by the Japanese. Eventually, they're going to attack the United States. As American involvement began to grow, the Neutrality Act prevented action on behalf of the United States. We'd signed this, we were staying out of the war, we're not getting involved. But we did sign the Lend-Lease Act, saying the U.S. could sell or lend war materials to any country whose defense the president deems vital to the defense of the United States, calling it the arsenal of democracy, meaning we were supplying weapons and materials to the Allied powers. We're also going to establish the Atlantic Charter with Great Britain, which called for the final destruction of the Nazi tyranny, the right of all to choose their own government, and a permanent system of general security to prevent this from ever happening again. Japan saw this as a direct threat to their power. Oop. So as we face off, Japan's going to start grabbing European territory in Southeast Asia, taking up valuable sources of oil, rubber, tin. These were valuable things to be able to use against China. Eventually, they're also going to take French Indochina and the Dutch East Indies. As a result, we're going to ban the sale of war materials to Japan, mainly iron, steel, and oil. Now, Japan saw this as the U.S. attempting to interfere in their sphere of influence, and these peace talks that they'd been participating in reached a standstill. But that was just a stopgap measure to distract us from what was really coming. The attack on Pearl Harbor, led by General Hideki Tojo, or Tojo Hideki. This was a surprise attack on a Sunday morning, December 7th, 1941, at 8 o'clock in the morning. Most of our troops that were stationed in Pearl Harbor were still in their bunks asleep. Over 2,000 servicemen will die. Now, FDR will call this a date that will live in infamy, and he's going to ask Congress to declare war. And officially, we will, on December 8th, declare war on Japan. By December 11th, Germany and Italy will also declare war on the United States. Now, it's important to know these Japanese victories were temporary. They'd taken the Philippines, a lot of U.S.-held islands, Hong Kong, Burma, and Malaya. But we were coming for them. All right, that is it for your notes for today. Your assignment is to start working on your World War II map. I will give that to you in class. It will not be due next time until the end of the block. I'll see y'all next time. Bye, everybody.